Alright YouTube, so we are back, of course, talking about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and it has been quite a while since we looked at any sort of like financial reports or financial briefings when it comes to Square Enix. We've looked at these quite a bit in the past, but it's been about 5 months since we last looked at a financial reports, and obviously there's 4 quarters within a year, in a fiscal year, so it seems like there's like a financial report somewhere down the road a couple months back that I just didn't see or talk about. And the financial report we're going to be looking at today is the first 9 months of Square Enix's fiscal year that ended on December 31st, the first 3 quarters. And for context, for those that may not be aware, Square Enix's fiscal year starts on April 1st and ends on March 31st of the next year. And it's always technically, quote-unquote, a year behind. So when April 1st rolls around in a couple of months, it's going to be the end of their 2021 fiscal year, despite us still being at the beginning of 2021. So on April 1st, 2021, it will start Square Enix's 2022 fiscal year. Now, much like articles and things we talk about here on the channel, most of this we don't need to read over. This is a lot of like technical speak, a lot of business speak. It's not necessarily important to us. But there's a couple interesting things from this in regards to how much money they're making with like Remake and also Marvel's Avengers. But and I don't mean any hate if you are into Marvel's Avengers, but it was just, even as a Marvel fan, just not interesting to me. And obviously the game was, I don't want to say a flop because it might have been financially successful, but that game died out really fast. So the first takeaway from this is that their net sales across the entire company went up 33.7% year over year, despite their profits dipping by 4.3%. Which I found to be a bit surprising. Now, I don't know the shit about business and all that other stuff. You know, I'm just a guy talking about video games on YouTube. But how do your sales go up like almost exactly a third more? Like, that's a lot more sales overall, a lot more money you made than last year at this time. But somehow you made less money? Even if it's just a little bit? I mean, it's millions of dollars, but it's just like 4%. But still, how do you make less money despite selling vastly more across the company? Like, they're obviously not in the hole. They didn't lose money, but the profit margin was a little bit lower than it was last year. It was just kind of shocking. This one I'm just going to read over really quickly. Looking specifically at Square Enix's digital entertainment segment, which houses its video game operations, net sales increased by 48.6% to 203.5 billion yen, or $1.9 billion, and operating income rose by 43% to 42.2 million yen, or $400.4 million. So if you just look at Square Enix's video game related stuff, like their net sales went up by damn near 50%, which they attribute to Marvel's Avengers and, of course, Final Fantasy VII Remake. I'm not sure what was out in the previous fiscal year, you know, April 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2019. I'm not sure what games came out in that period, but goddamn, Marvel's Avengers and Remake just destroyed that. They also attribute the upswing to the rise in digital sales, which is something we talked about a few times over the course of the game coming out. You know, because of COVID, as bad as it is, a lot more people bought the game digitally. Whenever you're buying a game digitally from like the PlayStation Store, like that company gets a lot more of the money than if you went like to Walmart or GameStop and bought a game physically. I don't know if they've ever come out and said the exact amount of like how many people that bought Remake bought it physically versus how many bought it digitally, but the amount of people that bought it digitally made them a shit ton more money. There's obviously other things that contributed to Square Enix having a successful first 3 quarters of their fiscal year. They have ongoing like MMOs and things like Final Fantasy XIV. They have mobile games and shit, which probably bring in a lot of money as well, I imagine. But new titles, obviously, like Marvel's Avengers and Remake are the big ones that make them a lot more money, in the short term anyways. Going forward, Square Enix still expects to hit their net sale goal of $2.7 billion, which are not super far off, and their profit of $227 million. So overall, they're roughly about $300 million off on the net sale goal and roughly about like $50 million off on the profit, which they should easily be able to make within the next couple of months. Just from the video game perspective, like they have all kinds of mobile games and stuff like that that are constantly bringing in money, sales on games like Remake and other shit like that. And then of course, we know that today, it should be going on right now as I'm recording, like that live stream for Final Fantasy XIV, then possibly announcing an expansion for that. I'd say possibly, but it's like all but a guarantee. But assuming that that expansion would release within the next couple months, within this current quarter, the 4th quarter of the current fiscal year, that should easily be able to push them like a lot closer to their goals. And if you want to throw on the tinfoil hat, as we always say, and talk about Remake related stuff, you have the possibility of them revealing a PS5 version of the game before March 31st, which if you could pre-order that, that would help them make a lot more money. And with Remake's exclusivity ending around the beginning of their next fiscal year, if like they ever talk about it or announce it coming to other platforms, you're able to pre-order it as well, like Xbox One, PC, PS5, if you want to throw that in there too. Like, if you can pre-order those games before April 1st, then they can make a lot more money that way too. Something else I want to throw in here at the end of the video that I'm not sure if we ever discussed last year when we're talking about like Remake and Square Enix and their fiscal years and stuff like that is, I wonder if the game didn't get delayed last year to April just to push it into the next fiscal year. And why I say that is because the initial release date of the game was March 3rd, which would have had it coming out, of course, at the end of their current fiscal year at the time, which wouldn't make a lot of sense because their fiscal years are usually profitable, and you would have the influx of sales because most games are going to sell the most at the beginning. At the end of their current fiscal year, that's already probably profitable. So it makes a lot of sense, honestly, business-wise, to push it into April 10th, put it in the next fiscal year so that fiscal year is also successful. And the reason I bring this up is because Remake's exclusivity ends at the beginning of Square Enix's next fiscal year, right? April 10th is when the exclusivity ends. Their next fiscal year starts April 1st. And the game coming to other platforms is obviously going to bring in a lot of money, depending on how many platforms it is. Hopefully it's as many as possible. But Remake alone coming to other platforms obviously will not be enough for them to have just an entirely successful year. So there's got to be another big release, whether that is something Remake related besides the game coming to other platforms. Maybe there's information or news in regards to Part 2. Maybe there's DLC for Part 1 that could help make them a lot of money. Or obviously something related to like a new IP. Like what was there? Babylon's Fall and Project Athia. Like those. I don't keep up with this shit, but I've just heard those names out there before. Don't know what's going on with those two IPs. And obviously something like Final Fantasy 16, which I think is the most likely. Also, something I forgot to mention was Life is Strange 3. That's supposed to potentially get an announcement sometime soon. I don't know how big those games are. I know they're pretty popular, but I don't know, like, in terms of how much money and sales those get or whatever. But between a new numbered entry in the Final Fantasy series with 16, something Life is Strange related, Remake coming to the platforms, and any other brand new games that may come out over the course of the next year or so will definitely contribute to Square Enix having another successful year. Anyways, dudes, that is pretty much the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, give a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys aren't even most updated. More Final Fantasy VII Remake, also like some Square Enix financial report related stuff, information. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter, dashingdavidYT. I'm my Discord. Links to social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.